Hello everyone. In the previous episode we went through a major shock with Tieu San and Hai when Hai's mother was deceived by an old friend into investing in real estate and lost her entire life savings. It was not only a financial loss, but also a direct blow to the trust and peace she had carefully preserved for so many years. A woman who had saved every penny, gathering small amounts over time in the hope of a peaceful old age, suddenly fell into confusion, self-blame, and such deep despair that she had to be hospitalized. The once peaceful family atmosphere became heavy, silent dinners stretched on, and sleepless nights followed one after another. In the midst of it all, Tieu San, though she was only dating Hai and had no formal status in the family, chose to stay. She quietly kept watch at the hospital, caring for his mother in his place, from every bowl of porridge to every pill. There were no complaints, not a single moment of hesitation. Her gentleness and patience became an emotional anchor, helping his mother gradually stabilize after the shock. Hai saw everything, and within him rose a mixture of gratitude and guilt. At the same time as caring for his mother, Hai and Tieu San began contacting others who had fallen into the same situation to gather information and agreed to report the case to the police together. The phone calls seemed endless. Meetings were held to exchange documents, and photocopied contracts piled up one on top of another. In the most chaotic moment, they turned to Hùng, Tieu San's older brother, who works in the police force, for guidance on the proper legal investigation procedures. And in today's episode, everything begins to enter a more intense phase, as the clues are gradually pieced together, and the full picture behind the case proves to be far more complicated than they had imagined. Immediately after receiving the information, Hùng and his team quickly took action. Each photocopied contract was carefully examined, every seal checked for authenticity, and every signature compared. Bank transfer statements were meticulously analyzed to trace the flow of money. Through the testimonies of multiple victims, a systematic operation gradually emerged. The suspect did not approach individuals randomly but built trust by claiming to have extensive connections, presenting projects supported by elaborately prepared but entirely fabricated documents. Even more concerning, this person constantly changed residences, used multiple phone numbers, and transferred money through intermediary accounts to mislead investigators. The amount embezzled was not just a few $100 million dong. When added up from multiple victims, it reached a very large sum. This meant the scale of the case was far more serious than initially expected. Hai proactively cooperated by providing every piece of data he could. As a seasoned businessman, he had a habit of examining cash flow to detect irregularities. He spent hours in front of his computer, reviewing each transfer, marking suspicious transactions, and creating detailed analytical reports to assist the investigation. His professional sharpness now became a tool to help reclaim justice for his family and for others. Meanwhile, Tieu San continued reaching out to the victims. She patiently explained the situation, encouraged them to remain calm, and asked them to provide additional evidence. Some were still confused, others felt ashamed for having trusted too easily. But her sincerity gradually helped them open up. Pieces of information were added, and the case file became more complete by the day. The atmosphere during those days was tense like a tightly stretched string. Everyone understood that a single mistake could cause the opportunity to slip away. One late evening, when the city lights were already glowing and the room was lit only by the faint glow of a desk lamp, Hai's phone suddenly vibrated. On the other end was Hùng. His voice was low, slow yet clear. The suspect shows signs of preparing to flee to another province. We're monitoring closely. The news made Hai's heart pound. After days of waiting and so much effort gathering evidence, everything now risked falling into a dead end if the suspect managed to escape. He tightened his grip on the phone, his hand trembling slightly. In his mind flashed the image of his mother lying in the hospital bed, her eyes filled with sadness and self-blame. He could not allow it to end here. Tieu San clearly saw the worry in his eyes. She said little, simply reaching out to gently hold his hand, a silent reminder that he was not alone. Her silence at that moment was not emptiness, but deep understanding. She knew Hai was carrying multiple pressures at once. His company was at a critical stage, his mother still needed care, and now there was the anxiety of waiting for every development in the investigation. In the days that followed, the search continued relentlessly. Every new piece of information was updated, every movement of the suspect closely tracked. Time seemed to stretch longer than usual. Every incoming call startled Hai and Tiểu San. Every message made their hearts sink with anticipation. The tension was no longer just a passing emotion. It became a constant state. Yet in those intense days, the two of them stood closer together than ever before. And the journey ahead was still unfolding, with developments that remained impossible to predict. Finally, after many days of close surveillance and the implementation of necessary investigative measures, Hùng and the authorities were able to uncover a crucial lead, accurately identifying the suspect's hiding place in a rented house deep in a suburban area. It was a secluded house with little foot traffic, its doors always tightly shut throughout the day. Every movement was carefully calculated to avoid drawing attention, ensuring that the inspection would take place at the right moment and under safe conditions. When the authorities entered to conduct the inspection, the atmosphere inside the house was instantly shattered by their sudden presence. Documents hastily hidden in drawers, stacks of elaborately printed fake contracts, multiple invalid seals, and papers related to non-existent projects were quickly seized. In addition, a portion of cash that had not yet been transferred elsewhere was discovered and sealed in accordance with regulations. Each piece of evidence was carefully recorded, every item documented in detail. The previously scattered clues now had solid legal grounds to confirm the unlawful acts. The moment Hai received the call informing him that the scammer had been arrested, he could hardly believe his ears. He stood still for a few seconds, the phone pressed to his ear, as if afraid that the news would vanish the moment he pulled it away. After days of tension and sleepless nights filled with anxious waiting, there was finally a clear answer. Hung's voice on the other end was calm yet firm, confirming that the arrest had been completed and the evidence was being inventoried. Tiểu San stood right beside him. When she heard Hai softly repeat, his voice choked with emotion, "They caught him." Her eyes welled up with tears. No further words were needed. Both of them understood that this was not just ordinary news, but a release from the heavy weight that had pressed on their minds for so many days. She gently tightened her grip on his hand, sharing that moment, the moment when hope once fragile had now become real. After the arrest, the expanded investigation was carried out urgently. Related bank accounts were frozen to prevent further dissipation of assets. The flow of money was traced in detail, each transaction reviewed to determine the extent of the damage and the possibility of recovery. In accordance with legal procedures, the recovered funds would be returned to the victims following due process. Although not everything could be resolved in a single day, the arrest marked a crucial turning point. At the very least, the truth had been clarified, and the opportunity to recover part of the losses had opened up. When Hai brought the news to the hospital, the familiar hallway somehow felt lighter to him. He stepped into the room and saw his mother leaning back against the bed, her eyes still carrying a trace of fatigue. He sat down beside her, held her hand, and slowly recounted everything that had happened. She fell silent for a few seconds, as if needing time to absorb the information. Then suddenly tears streamed down her face. But this time they were no longer tears of self-blame or regret for having trusted too easily. They were tears of relief after long days of living in guilt. The heavy burden in her heart seemed to lift piece by piece. She turned to Tiểu San and held her hand tightly. That gesture carried more meaning than words. "If it weren't for you, I don't think I could have endured this." Her voice trembled, but warmth had returned to her eyes. Tiểu San simply smiled gently and replied, Family means standing by each other in the hardest times. The words were simple, without embellishment, yet they were enough to make the once cold hospital room feel warmer. Hai looked at the two most important women in his life, his heart filled with deep gratitude. Over the past days, he had seen that Tieu San was not only by his side as a girlfriend, but as a true daughter within the family. Thanks to Tieu San's devoted care and the emotional relief that came with the positive turn in the case, his mother's health gradually stabilized day by day. Warm bowls of porridge were prepared thoughtfully, gentle conversations eased her worries, and Hai's constant presence by her side gave her reassurance like never before. The confusion that once clouded her eyes had faded. The conversations among the three of them now carried more laughter. Each time the doctor came for a checkup, the results showed steady improvement. No miracle had occurred. Her recovery came from emotional release, from knowing that her family remained strong beside her. The ordeal was not entirely over, but the dark cloud that had once hung over the family was slowly lifting. And in the peace that was gradually returning, they all understood that the difficult days they had just endured had drawn them closer, made them cherish one another more deeply, and prepared them to move forward on the road ahead with a renewed sense of strength. This ordeal was not merely a journey to seek justice under the law, but also a profound test for every member of the family. The tense days, the long nights of anxious waiting, the moments that felt almost hopeless forced each of them to confront their true emotions. It was in such circumstances that they saw more clearly the value of companionship, of trust, and of family bonds. Hai realized that throughout the turbulent time they had just endured, what allowed him to remain steady was not only the responsibility of a son, nor solely the resilience of a businessman accustomed to pressure, but also the quiet yet unwavering presence of Tieu San by his side. She did not seek attention, nor did she demand anything in return. She simply shared the burden silently. When he was exhausted, she was there. When he was confused, she remained calm. When he nearly lost faith, she was the one who reminded him that as long as they persisted, there would always be a way forward. These gestures were not loud, yet they were deep enough to etch themselves into his heart. Hai began to understand that love is not measured by grand promises, but by the willingness of someone to stay during the hardest moments. And the woman who had held his hand through the storm was the one he could not afford to lose. The period during which his mother gradually recovered felt like a slowing of time, a pause that allowed the family to truly look at one another again. The steady beeping of heart monitors no longer echoed in a hospital room. The anxious, restless glances had faded. In their place were gentle afternoons with soft sunlight spilling across the small courtyard in front of the house. His mother could now walk slowly on her own, sometimes stopping to look at the potted plants by the porch, as if relearning the rhythm of ordinary life after days of upheaval. On one peaceful afternoon like that, as the breeze brushed lightly through the leaves, Hai stood beside Tieu San watching his mother take steadier steps. The space no longer felt heavy as it once had. In the fading light of day, everything seemed calmer, as though the storm had finally retreated. He turned to Tieu San. The tension that once filled his eyes had been replaced by the quiet depth of someone who had survived hardship. His voice lowered, not loud but clear enough for her to hear. "Thank you for not walking away." It was more than a simple expression of gratitude. Behind those words lay everything he had been unable to say during the chaotic days. Appreciation, respect, and a silent acknowledgement of her place in his heart. Tieu San looked at him, her eyes as gentle as the way she had always stood beside him. She did not appear surprised, nor did she exaggerate the moment. Just a soft, calm, and warm smile. "I wasn't planning to go anywhere." Her answer was as simple as she was. No grand vows, no dramatic emphasis. Just a natural presence, as if staying by his side was the most obvious thing in the world. Hai fell silent for a few seconds, then gently took her hand. That hand had once tightened around his when he was anxious, rested on his shoulder when he was weary, wiped away his mother's tears in the hospital. Now he held it not out of fear, but out of certainty. The ordeal had passed, yet its echo did not disappear entirely. It left behind lessons in every heart. For his mother, it was caution and a deeper appreciation for peace. For Hai, it was the realization of who truly walks beside him. And for Tieu San, perhaps she did not believe she had done anything extraordinary, because to her, staying together in difficult times was simply what should be done. That afternoon drifted by slowly. His mother walked a few more laps around the yard, occasionally turning to look at the young couple standing side by side, her eyes filled with the reassurance she once feared she might lose. Nothing needed to be spoken. Yet everyone understood that this family had crossed an important trial. And from that trial, the bond between them became stronger, quietly yet deeply, like the final rays of sunlight at day's end, spreading warmth with quiet persistence. After all the upheavals that once seemed capable of sweeping everything away, the family finally found their way back to peace. It was not an overwhelming joy because the money had been fully recovered, nor merely relief because the situation had temporarily settled. It was the quiet comfort of seeing that they were still there for one another. Still whole, still holding tightly to each other's hands just as they had during the hardest days. That peace was not loud or showy. It revealed itself in dinners no longer filled with heavy sighs. In the look in Hai's mother's eyes as she sat on the porch, slowly sipping her tea while watching the two young people talk. In the fact that Hai no longer stayed awake all night worrying. And in Tieu San's smile as she saw the family gradually returning to their normal rhythm. They understood that money could be lost and regained, but trust, once shattered, would be far harder to mend. It was their shared journey through the trial, facing the truth together, carrying the pressure together, supporting one another. That kept this family from breaking apart. Those tense days had made them see clearly the value of presence. No one turned away. No one let go. Hai still occasionally recalled the nights spent sitting in the hospital corridor, his heart filled with unease. He remembered the suffocating tightness in his chest when he heard the suspect might flee. And he vividly remembered Tieu San's hand gently tightening around his at the moment he nearly lost his balance. Those memories no longer caused him pain. Instead, they became reminders of the most important truth. Family is not a place reserved only for calm days, but a place where people walk through storms together. His mother was now healthier, her steps steadier each morning. She no longer blamed herself as she once had. Instead, she cherished every ordinary moment. Some afternoons, she would call Tieu San over for a simple conversation, her eyes filled with trust. The bond between them was no longer polite distance. It was familiarity forged through shared hardship. Tieu San remained the same, gentle, quiet, yet strong. She did not revisit the difficulties they had endured, nor did she consider them extraordinary. To her, standing by one another during hardship was simply natural. And it was precisely that natural steadfastness that deepened the trust Hai placed in her with each passing day. Yet life rarely presents only a single trial. The storm may have temporarily subsided, but no one could say that the road ahead would be filled only with sunshine. Hai's work remained demanding. Social relationships always carried uncertainties, and every challenge, whether large or small, could become a new test of a family's strength. Was what they had just experienced the hardest chapter? Or was it merely the beginning of new trials quietly waiting ahead? The peace they now enjoyed was the result of unity, but to preserve it they would likely need to grow even stronger, to understand one another more deeply, and to trust each other even more. The journey of Tieu San and CEO Hai is far from over. New emotions, important choices, and turning points are gradually unfolding. Stay tuned for the next episode to continue walking alongside Tieu San and CEO Hai.
Xin chào mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Mình lại là kênh Tiểu San TT Review đây. Hôm nay thì mình sẽ đưa đến với mọi người tập tiếp theo của video về Tiểu San và Hải nhé mọi người. Bây giờ thì mình đang làm tiếp tục nội dung. Như nội dung ở tập trước thì các bạn cũng đã biết thì hiện tại thì Tiểu San và Hải đang ở trong một cái sự việc, đó là mẹ của Hải bị lừa, mọi người bị lừa mất một số tiền tiết kiệm cũng khá là lớn. Thì nhanh chóng thì Hải đã cùng với những người bị lừa đó là khởi kiện lên công an, cũng như là nhờ Hùng, anh trai của Tiểu San, để anh em có thể cùng nhau hỗ trợ điều tra. Và liệu sự việc như thế nào thì như ở trong video mọi người cũng đã biết thì một cái kết khá là có hậu khi mà may mắn đã tìm được kẻ lừa đảo và lấy lại được tiền. Hãy theo dõi những video tiếp theo để biết thêm chi tiết về câu chuyện của Hải và Tiểu San mọi người nhé. Đừng quên đăng ký kênh của mình và ủng hộ cho kênh của mình bằng cách like cũng như để lại bình luận về ý kiến của bạn cho tập phim hôm nay. Tạm biệt và hẹn gặp lại.